go live in like.
Ready?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ricky Fairley, and this is our second episode of our new series called Love Your Bones. Our co-host is not feeling well today. I think her allergies got to her, the pollen. We have yellow snow everywhere here in Maryland, so I'm sure that's happening all over the country. And she's in Alabama, so I'm sure she's got pollen city going on down there. But I have two awesome friends that are just lovely, 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 that kind of came in for the clinch at the last minute to help me out today. I have our medical advisor, Dr. Aisha Chilcote, and she is our naturopath on our medical advisory team. And I have our co-founder of Touch's brother, Gregory Clark. So Greg Clark, thank you so much, you guys, for being here with me. I'm so blessed to have you guys in my family, in my sandbox. And today we are going to talk about bones and talk about nutrition and talk about all the things that we should be doing better to help keep our bones healthy. And I think that the title that we called this episode was, do you live to eat or eat to live? And that, you know, takes care of kind of everything. And I know we all in some form or fashion live to eat, and we don't always eat to live. So let's talk about that, you guys. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves, and then we'll get into our conversation about how we can do better by our bones. So go, Dr. Aisha.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Dr. Aisha Chilcote, and I am a naturopathic doctor. And I received my training at Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine in Arizona. And so what I do is I really look at the body holistically. So not just if someone has one particular issue, but I really look at the nutrition, how they sleep, what their pain is like, just a whole picture. So naturopathic medicine is more of a holistic approach and looking at natural therapies to bring about better health and wellness. So I'm so happy to be here, Ricky, and glad we could be talking about bone health.
I'm so glad you're here. And Dr. Greg.
I'm Dr. Gregory Clark. I have a PhD in synthetic organic chemistry with a focus on natural products. I've worked on the corporate side with the 3M company. I worked in the governmental side with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, but my heart has always been in the nutraceutical industry, showing how botanicals have been used over the centuries in different parts of the world. I work a lot with individuals who are battling various types of diseases, including cancer and many others. I've worked with a lot of professional athletes as well. I don't see the usage of botanicals as a replacement, but a complement to conventional therapies. And it is my great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so can you break it down for the 5-year-old people like me, the 5-year-old brains, like what is a nutraceutical and what is a botanical?
A nutraceutical is a type of botanical that has more stringent requirements in terms of the exact amount of the active ingredient that is present. So you could buy a botanical that's a whole plant, and let's say it's 500 milligrams, but if they don't give you the specific amount of the active ingredient that's present, it's not nearly as potent. So nutraceuticals generally are comprised of botanicals that are extracts, so you can actually have a better feel for what the amount of the active ingredient is.
So a botanical is like an extract from a plant?
Botanical is a plant, but the nutraceutical aspect is the extract.
Okay, makes it more powerful. Okay, yeah. Okay. All right, so let's talk about bones. And, we brought this up on our last show, but, Black people, are suffering as usual, when they say when white people get a cold, Black people get pneumonia. And with regard to bones, it's really bad. And I'm just going to read this. One of these stats I had, we talked about last time, is, you know, Black women have a significantly different 1 year post-fracture outcome, right? So compared with white women, Black women have a 38% higher incidence of mortality within 1 year of a fracture. Isn't that crazy? A 40% higher rate of debility, 185% higher rate of destitution, and a 35% higher composite outcome for a hip fracture. And it gets worse with other fractures. So that means that within 1 year of a fracture, we're dying. Like, that's crazy. And we don't have any age-specific data, but this isn't just old people I'm talking about. This is across the board of, you know, people over 35. So young people are dying because they fell and hurt their bone. Their bones didn't work for them, and it caused them to fall. So we got to be healthier. We got to be healthier. You know, what can we be doing to help ourselves? You know, clearly nutrition and exercise are fundamentals or risk factors for, you know, bad bone health. So what should we be doing differently, you guys? Like, what should we be doing differently?
I think it's a great question, Ricky. Dr. Greg, you want to go first? He has so much knowledge. I just love to hear him
I know, I love to hear him talk. I know.
You do all the science stuff, and then I can translate and just, you know.
Well, I think that one of the things that I like to sort of stress is the difference between something being acidic and basic. And from that standpoint, you know, if you were to take a bone, say a chicken bone, and you put it in something like vinegar and just let it sit, after a few days, what you begin to notice is that the bone itself actually begins to become more flexible, because a lot of the minerals in terms of the calcium and the potassium and the magnesium is actually leached out of the bones because of the acidic medium. Now, when you then translate that into the typical diet, it is top loaded with a lot of different types of foods that leave behind an acid residue. So what you have in the system is a higher level of acidity, and that is, of course, being exposed to all the different bones. And over time, porosity or hollow places within the bone can occur as these minerals are being leached out. Now, to counter that, you want to have an ample amount of alkalizing type foods, which are like green leafy vegetables, so that the overall effect of a meal is more basic than acidic. And what I submit to you is that the typical American diet does not have nearly enough of the alkalizing green leafy vegetable type foods, but it has too many of the foods that leave an acid residue. Now, this is not something that takes place over a matter of days, but it's a lifestyle. And at some point in time, there is enough loss of essential minerals that the porosity of the bones begins to be such that it becomes more brittle, and breakage and falls and those kind of things are more likely. So in general, the first wave is looking at diet as a whole. I think a lot
You don't want to put vinegar on your greens, which a lot of Black people do. That's what I took away from that. Right?
Well, but you want to make sure that you have the ratio of the greens outweighs a lot of the other foods. So you want to make sure that the balance. I remember reading a book entitled Alkalize or Die. And it basically said that we live better in an alkaline environment. Even things like cancer does not replicate nearly as much in an alkaline environment. But we are, as a society, far, far, far to the low pH side, which is acidic. So the first step would certainly be to adjust our diets accordingly. I think finally that a lot of people feel like as long as they're doing low fat and they're consuming complex carbohydrates, then that takes care of all the bases. And then they'll have 2 string beans, and that's the vegetable component. So we need to get our ratios together as a first step. There are other things I can say, but that'd be the first comment.
So Dr. Greg, so when you say alkaline, you mean basic, and then so what
Basic.
are other foods? What are other foods like greens? Like what else should we be eating? Like on the heavier side?
Pretty much most of the vegetables are going to lean on the alkaline side. The
Okay.
green leafies would certainly be at the top, but the cruciferous vegetables, the broccoli, cauliflower, all of those things, it's going to be on the alkaline side. But green leafy vegetables, collards, kale, Swiss chard, mustard greens, all of those. For the last 28 years, never does more than 2 or 3 days go by where I don't have ample amount of greens. I mean, it's just a staple. The other thing is the green leafy vegetables not only just are alkaline, but they are loaded with the trace minerals that the bones actually need. And for bones to absorb these minerals, it needs to be more of a basic environment. So the acidic environment prevents the nutrients from replenishing themselves, and it adversely affects bone density as well. I mean, there are other factors, such as, of course, the vitamin D level. The vitamin D is critical not only to the immune system, but it's also critical into stimulating things like the insulin growth factor. And that, in conjunction with the hormone level, is what gives the signal for nutrients to be absorbed into the bones. And over time, stress levels and the environments that we live in, it all contributes to this complex matrix that preferentially impacts people who are minority groups than it does other groups. And unfortunately, I think that's why you have some of the statistics that you quoted at the beginning of the show.
Wow. Okay, so slow down a minute. I'm like, woo. Okay.
Well, let me say, yeah, I think that what Dr. Greg said is so on point. And when we really think about this balance, right? If you think about the body in terms of balance, acidic foods, basic foods. I love the green leafies because he's right. That is completely going to bring that balance in. From most people's diets tend to be on the acidic side. That's your breads, the mac and cheese we were talking about earlier.
Bread is acidic.
Well, anything that's not veggies, like the veggies, that's all the stuff that we typically don't really consume are the things that help to bring that alkalinity. So you can look, I love that book that he mentioned, but just really alkalinizing our body, that is really the crux and foundation of our health. The other thing is water. The water that we drink can either be acidic or basic. So you may have seen waters like, what is it, Essentia, or just different types of waters, and the pH will have like a higher number.
Water.
Yeah.
Smart water.
Yeah, and you'll see those, it'll have like a pH number,
like
and it will usually,
water.
Right, it'll be advertised and it says high alkaline, like how high alkaline water. These are also other nutritive things that we can do to bring back balance. But with that being said, we can't just eat a bunch of acidic food, never eat basic food, and just think we're going to do water and we're good. So it's about that balance, right? It's about having enough balance. And one other thing I would like to submit is just, we have to decrease the amount of foods that are creating the acid environment. So the certain foods that we have, like the breads and could be potatoes, just things that are not just your green leafies, your plant-based nuts, seeds, vegetables. And that's just not typically how most American people have been taught to eat. So we really don't know that, we don't really understand the detriment of it. So I think, Ricky, when you brought up the stats with what's going on with African-American people and their health in terms of the fractures, it's kind of alarming, right? Because one of the main things is we have to have a better sort of foundational baseline health situation before we have any type of fracture to make sure that we can recover better and we won't have those.
It's really how you are ready. I mean, what you're doing now to prevent the fracture, right? I mean, it's almost like, once you get it, you're really screwed, because if you haven't prepared for it by doing the right thing. So let's go back to the foods, because I really want to try to be specific about what a green leafy vegetable is. Like I've heard that, like What's the lettuce that's in a ball?
Lettuce?
Iceberg lettuce.
Iceberg.
Everyone don't eat that, right? Because it's
Right.
not,
Yeah.
No
don't want
nutrients.
no nutrients. We don't want to eat that. So we want to eat good lettuce. Like, can you name some lettuces we should eat? So we can be really prescriptive to people. And let's talk about what greens we should, like, does asparagus count? Does spinach count? Let's try to make a list of all the things we should be eating. So we can be really
I
specific.
like a mix of greens. So I know some people say, okay, well, I'll do romaine lettuce. I won't do iceberg lettuce. But there's other things like arugula. I don't know if anybody's ever seen or heard that, but arugula is really great. There's things like kale. Some people have to be a little bit careful with kale because it can be pretty hardy and it may be too dense for people for their digestion. But kale salad can be another good option. There's spinach. Spinach is one that I don't tend to have people just straight do spinach salads because spinach can also create high oxalate levels in our body. And that can, not in everybody, but it can be attributed to creating stones, like a kidney stone. So I usually have people do a mix. So it's fine. I love spinach too. It's just, you know, when you say, and we do these talks, you just don't want people to just only do spinach, right? Like you want people to mix and do different things. So spinach is good, kale, you know, these are all different options that I think will be very helpful and beneficial in terms of green leafies, right? And then there's other things. I mean, I don't know, Dr. Greg probably can tell you more about that too, but carrots, I mean, can also be really helpful. I think the key for me when I'm working with patients is variety. So I want people to eat a variety of foods that are plant-based, they're colorful, because these are things that help you to get all the different nutrients, all the different, what's the other, phytochemicals, that's another big word, but that's what makes the coloring in these foods so important. So definitely think a mix is good.
Thanks. Greg, anything, what do you think? Anything else?
Sure. I was jotting down a couple of things. I think, Ricky, you seem to be a little surprised by the issue of breads and those kinds of things and why they may be acidic. And I wanted to kind of maybe break that down a little bit. Every carbohydrate will ultimately break down to glucose. The only question is how fast will that occur? Something like table sugar is almost instantaneous. Something like oatmeal, which is a complex carbohydrate, takes quite a bit of time before those glycosidic bonds that tie those materials together breaks down. So you're not going to get a quick rush in blood sugar. So it's going to be gradual. Something like potatoes, the starch, eventually it breaks down also to glucose. So now what happens is the glucose gets coupled with insulin. Insulin pulls it inside of the cell. The mitochondria of the cell burns it as fuel. It produces this material called ATP. That's what fuels us to do all of the different activities that we do. But what happens to the excess glucose in the system when we have that plate of food where carbohydrates represent 70, 80% of the meal? That excess glucose is processed in the liver, and that's what produces the low density lipids. And those low density lipids actually at the site of inflammation in the body goes to those areas to actually try to control the inflammation. And that's how we get the buildup of those materials that can lead to hardening of the arteries, clotting, those types of things. And it also decreases mineral absorption and the digestive process itself. So operating on a higher level of carbs is not the way, but we have sort of been led in that direction because in the late 50s, early 60s, the US Surgeon General came out with the food pyramid. If you remember the old food pyramid, you know, cereals, breads, all those, eat as much as you want. Fats and all those things, they made no distinction between healthy fats and unhealthy fats, but that was the smallest ratio. So what we've done is we have had a proliferation in every type of carbohydrate you can find. There are thousands of types of potatoes and tortilla chips, and there are millions of noodles and all these things that you can consume. And people have really had their feel of those things, but gradually that has affected the society. So when you start talking about obesity, we start talking about bone density, a lot of that is because of the way that we eat. I want to put a footnote in also is as we get older and the production of digestive enzymes decrease, you can be eating the right things, but you are not actually assimilating the nutrient value. So you're not resupplying the bones with the minerals that they need because your system is not adequately breaking down the food. So their supplementation with digestive enzymes could also have a positive impact on how the food is breaking down to make the minerals more bioavailable. The last thing I'll say is this: we talked about vegetables. I think we also should make a distinction between cooked vegetables and raw vegetables. The beautiful thing about raw vegetables is that they also have what's called active enzymes that are destroyed by the cooking process, and they have natural salts. And these salts act as what's called a buffer. A buffer is a material that resists changes in pH. So the shift toward being more acidic is less likely when you have enough of these salts from the raw foods that you're consuming. So then the absorption of nutrients will be more constant than inhibited by what people typically find in their diet. And that's critical, where I really recommend the usage of raw vegetable juices from a juice extractor, because there you're getting all of the phytonutrients as well as the organic and inorganic salts that do help improve the absorption of nutrients to resupply your system with the things that it needs that you might not be able to get as well in the cooked form. So I like a blend between cooked vegetables, stir-fried vegetables, and also vegetable juicing.
Okay, so go back for a second. So first of all, is rice in that category that you put in potato, said about potatoes and bread?
It is.
A lot of rice. Okay, so rice counts too about the bad stuff. And then,
but I'm not demonizing all rice.
Right.
We're talking about proportion here.
Okay. All right. So can we be prescriptive? Can you be prescriptive? Like, what we should eat is this, what we shouldn't eat is that. I mean, we talked about.
I'm an advocate of brown and black rices as opposed to the white refined rice, because the fiber and the nutrients have been stripped away. So I'm not a fan of the white rice, but again, the brown and black. When we lived in Minnesota, we found this Minnesota rice that was a black rice that was so meaty when you cooked it, and I became addicted to that. It was so good. But again, it's about the ratio of what you're consuming. You just don't want to have a plate that's 70 and 80% rice. And then you have a meat portion and then, a couple of string beans. That's just not balanced.
Okay. All right.
And rice, just so I can bring this up about rice, I'm glad that Dr. Greg mentioned the brown and black rice, because rice is one of the main sources, is a high source of something called arsenic, which I always want people to kind of steer away from just eating a lot of rice, thinking that that's all healthy, because it's how rice is created, or not created, but how it's actually manufactured. There's actually higher levels, and they've been studying this for the last 10, 15 years, of that being a high source of arsenic. Which is a heavy metal, right? So I think when we're talking about diet, we're talking about nutrition. I think Dr. Greg mentioned 1958, we have this food pyramid. That's the same pyramid I was trained in. But if we kind of have to notice and see that some of that information in our nutritional training is outdated. And not only is it outdated, there was inconsistencies and things that were not correct. So I think what we're doing here is really nice, because we're trying to give level of education and elevate that way of thinking, because most people are not getting nutrition training unless they take a special nutrition class or they Google something or read a book. So it's not something that we're typically getting in our communities. And I think it's really important to have that distinction between, yes, we know we want to eat healthy, so what do we do? And I think, you know, when I'm working with patients, one of the main things I try to encourage is, first step, more plant-based, just making that shift. It may even seem a little dramatic, but like Dr. Greg mentioned, the juicing and with the raw vegetables and the raw, like make kind of like a smoothie. For me, that's sort of how I started years ago, because I wanted to make sure I was getting the minerals, I was getting the fiber, I was getting all the goodies that the vegetables had to offer. And I found that that was probably the easiest way to do it, because I wasn't really quite there with just eating salads all the time or just having a whole bunch of vegetables. So it's like, okay, let's graduate. Let's do this in phases where we can start to kind of get to a place where we can shift from this acidic environment, these foods that are, you know, like everything, you know, we eat all the time, to actually creating that more alkaline, basic diet. And that's also going to help, you know, like with your bones, as Dr. Greg was mentioning. So.
Okay. So what if you wanted to like start juicing? Like, I mean, you know, to me, I really want a chocolate milkshake. Okay. So I know that's bad, but I don't really like juice, but I eat a lot of vegetables, but I do think I should consider juicing to get more nutrients. You know what I mean? I know, because sometimes I just don't have time to cook vegetables or eat or find them raw. But like, how do I start? Like, if I wanted to start doing, like, what's the best thing to do? Like, buy some spinach, put in the blender, or like.
Well, the beautiful thing about the age in which we live, you can pretty much find so much information online. If you just Google vegetable juice formulas, they have formulas that focus on vegetables that are known to have phytochemicals that have this effect, that effect. There are vegetables that help to stabilize blood sugar profiles. There are vegetables that have very strong anti-cancer properties. And those combinations are generally there. Over the years, I've recommended different types of combinations, but I also say that when you go out to buy a juicer, the classical one is the centrifuge-based juicer that has a spinning tray. I'm not a big fan of that because it generates a certain amount of heat, and the heat can actually harm some of the phytochemicals. I like the juicers that would be considered as cold press juicers that crush the vegetables. Yeah, that crush the vegetables as opposed to send them through the frit of the centrifuge. So that I would certainly recommend that. And then once you do that, you know, don't make this like a dissertation. Get a base formula starting out with carrots, celery, maybe some Brussels sprouts. Throw some string beans in there and play around with things. Sometimes people will put a little bit of garlic in, or they'll take fresh turmeric. There's a lot of things that you can put in there. Then, you know, part of a green apple. I mean, you can mix and match things up until you find that sweet spot of something that you really like that you're going to drink. And then when you make it, make enough for a couple of days, but don't make enough for 5 or 6 days, because the active enzymes refrigerated are only going to last about 36 to 48 hours. So make enough for a day or two, but not beyond that.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, thank you for that.
And, you know, Ricky, I'll just say, I think one of the things that's, you know, so important, you know, the nutrition is one piece. And so we also have, and I don't know if you're going to ask us about like exercise or anything like that. So we want, you know, I want to encourage everybody to kind of understand that it's more of a multi-faceted type process. It's not just one thing. The nutrition is certainly the foundation, right? So that's really important. But I also think having the exercise, because that also helps, especially the weight-bearing exercise, also helps with the integrity of our bones. And I think what I always like people to do is something pretty simple, which is like the resistance bands. You know, some of those types of exercises, everybody doesn't have weights at their house. So you want to be careful, especially if you're kind of starting out and you say, okay, I'm going to change my diet, I'm going to work out, I'm going to do this, and, you know, all of these things. You want to be careful because they're if you already have a situation, let's say where you're osteopenic, which means you have a little bit lower bone density, you're not quite osteoporosis, but you just want to be careful if you're going to start a new weight-bearing regimen, before doing that. But definitely resistance bands are usually pretty benign. You can do that pretty easily. You can do it in your house, but you want to do some level of strengthening, because that will also help to support your overall bone health. So
Great. So not, can you walk, is walking okay?
walking is okay, but there's no real weight bearing to that.
You need more
right?
weight bearing. So like, what about cycling? What about, riding your bike with your kids, or so that's not
good. I think, sometimes just even having some like weights, like hand weights, if you walk, you could, some people I've seen them strap them on their legs. It just depends. And if that's really at the point, if you have an issue that you know about in a certain area where your bones are. But if it's somebody that's just relatively healthy and they think everything is fine, sure, riding your bike, getting active. But then as you get active, you want to then still reserve a component to do some level of weight-bearing exercise.
right. So carry your water bottle. That's a weight, right? If you carry the water bottle.
And not a heavy weight. I've seen people with these backpacks, and there's so much in the backpack. That's not good for your alignment either. So you want to make sure you're doing some weight bearing. But I know when I was in school, I'd have that backpack was so heavy. I mean, looked like another person was hanging off me. So you don't want that, right? But you do want to have enough where you're helping. It's more of a healthy situation versus a harmful one. So
great. What do you do? What do you do for exercise, Dr. Greg? I don't even want to know. I can only imagine.
Well, I am actually coming to grips with the reality that I may not ever be the distance runner that I was. I guess about 6 years ago, two of my boys were playing flag football, and at the end of the season, they had a parents versus students game, and in that game, I had a high school flashback and tried to do things I shouldn't have done, and I ruptured my quadriceps tendon, and so that was major surgery to reattach it to the kneecap. And since that time, running has been, I just don't feel the flow that I used to feel. So I've had to migrate to more biking. I do distance biking, trail biking. After a 30-year absence, I took swimming lessons, and so I'm back into swimming. And for those who have issues with their joints, swimming is excellent. See, the natural buoyancy of the body takes a lot of the weight off the joints, but you still have the resistance from being in the water. Even if you can't swim, just be in reasonably depth water and walk in place, water aerobics class. I mean, it's amazing how much energy you have to use because of that resistance. And it actually feels like you're getting a massage while you're exercising. But I like to do those kinds of things. And I like to really try to do it out in the sun as much as possible. So exercise in direct sunlight and long bike rides in direct sunlight. That's what I pretty much do these days. And then I have some equipment at home. I don't know if you guys have heard of the TRX bands. And so I like to use those because it's resistance, and you can adjust the amount of resistance based on the angle at which you're standing and holding the bands. And then just basic things like push-ups, sit-ups. That's pretty
resistant. Okay, push-ups and sit-ups are resistant,
or even up against the wall, like doing them against the wall. So you're not, sometimes it's kind of hard to get all the way down the floor trying to do a sit-up or push-up. But you can even just pushing your body weight on the wall. Even that's providing a little bit of that for you. So
and standing more than sitting. If you're operating a computer all day like I do, I made the investment so I could have the rack or stand that I can stand up sometimes and work rather than just sitting down. And then I do certain exercises while I'm still typing. And I know that there are even some stations where you can actually have a setup to do stationary biking while you're still on the computer. So there are ways in which you can stay active, because a lot of people say, I don't have time to get out because I have to do this,
Right.
but you can sort of
Right.
multitask.
Right. Right. I've heard that saying that, that sitting is the new smoking. Right. So we really do want to stand up. What about even just walking up and down stairs? Like, does that help?
Yeah.
That's great. Squat.
Yeah.
Even just doing squats, as you're sitting there working on your computer. I mean, just anything where you're moving, you're bending, you know what I mean? Like, that's really impactful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Even gardening is very good.
Gardening. Yeah. Great. I know we just take we take our bodies for granted. And, you wake up every morning. And I remember when I had cancer, when I was on chemo, having to talk to myself to get out of bed. Okay, Ricky, you have to go to the bathroom. So what does that mean? That means you have to sit up, turn your body around, put your feet on the floor. All right, now you got to stand up and like walk to, and I took for granted that all these things worked, and they didn't work when I was on chemo. I had to talk myself into it. But, now, that I'm healthy, we take it for granted that we just like assume that our bodies are going to keep working, and then when something happens, we're shocked.
Mm-hmm.
We're shocked. Like, you can't be shocked because we caused it.
Right.
I mean, there's so many things that we can prevent from happening. So thank you for this. So can we dial back a minute? Because Dr. Greg, you kind of breezed over the vitamin D thing really fast, the vitamin thing. Can we talk about vitamins a little bit and supplements? Are there things that we should be taking? Like I stay in the sun because I'm on the water all the time. I'm out there, paddleboarding at sunrise, but most Black people don't go in the sun. They're like, staying in the house when it's hot. But how can we let's talk about vitamin D. And I know there are so many people who had deficiencies and died from COVID, right? So what is vitamin D, what we should be doing, and how should we do that? And then what other vitamins should we be thinking about?
Well, I mean, when it comes to vitamin D, the first thing I recommend is go see your doctor and get some blood work done so you know where you are.
Okay.
Some people are not low, but statistically, most people are, because we don't get the direct sunlight exposure. Some people's biochemistry has evolved to the place that it doesn't convert sunlight as well. So, but step one is to know where you are in terms of vitamin D. With supplementation, I know a lot of people that take the gel caps for vitamin D3, and I've over the years I've sort of shifted. You can take these supplements and think that they're going to fortify your vitamin D level, but absorption is the key, because vitamin D is actually fat soluble. It's more hormone-like than the other vitamins, and if it's not taken or consumed with a meal that has an appreciable amount of fat, then absorption can be an issue. There are some products out there, however, that couple the vitamin D with something that's called a phospholipid. So it's a fatty molecule that's attached to the vitamin D, and it helps get a lot more of it into the cell. Also, supplementing trace minerals along with the vitamin D can also improve the absorption. And so those are some of the fundamental things, I think, as it relates to vitamin D. And it can't be understated or overstated, rather, that vitamin D is critical. It is critical. You mentioned a little bit about COVID and vitamin D. And when that vitamin D level is low and trace mineral levels such as things like zinc is low, it really sets the person up to have a very difficult time with that particular virus. And so this is not just supplementation for supplementation's sake, but in some cases it can be a matter of life and death. And these are for individuals who are vaccinated and boosted up to the hilt and still contract the illness. And those underlying factors that affect the natural immunity have not been sufficiently addressed. And if you hit that critical combination where your system is facing a particular pathogen, and you don't have the biochemical framework in place for the natural immune response to be there, then you can have some problems. I've worked very recently in the area of natural immunoboosting supplements. I actually just produced one and generated a whole new brand on the basis of that. And one of the premise is that, along with many other things, the vitamin D and the trace minerals also help what's called the mitochondria of the cell. And that's where you actually are producing the energy, and it allows the immune cells to have a more sustainable response to attack. Some people have moderate levels of natural immunity that initially is pretty formidable, but it is not sustainable. And when you're dealing with certain things like we're facing now, you need a sustainable response. And that's going to require everything from the nutrients in the meals that you're eating and wise supplementation and getting adequate checkups so that you know where you stand in certain critical parameters.
Yeah,
So,
go
ahead.
Just with the COVID piece, I think, vitamin D and the zinc are critical. And some people have been they'll take those because they've heard about them. But there's actually a lot of substantial evidence, especially with the vitamin D3, for really helping to support immune system, immune function. And then the other one that has been really studied is something called quercetin. And quercetin is really found in onions. It's like there's natural foods that some of these things are found in. So when we were first talking about eating healthy and eating our vegetables and all of that, there's another benefit to it because quercetin is also very high in helping with it's giving antiviral support, right? And so there's actually been specific research related to COVID in that. So when people are battling that, first thing I really say is decrease that sugar intake 100%. Just decrease it because the sugar is going to decrease your immune system as well, right? And sodas, when we drink sodas, we're getting a high amount of sugar, but we're also getting something called phosphoric acid that's included in the soda, which can also be a part of that process of creating more alkalinity and leaching out those important minerals from the bones. So you just want to make sure that sugar is not something that's like sky high in your diet. And also, especially when you're fighting a viral, anything viral, like an illness or something, because that is also going to lower your immune system. So I'm all for taking supplements like vitamin D and things to support bones, but there's also things that we may actively be doing that we should sort of, not do, right? So tons of sodas, drinking, sugary stuff, limiting those types of things.
It's funny. I give up sugar for Lent. I'm totally a chocoholic and I eat ice cream every day. And I give it up for Lent every year. And there's like this withdrawal process as I give it up where I'm like so cranky, right? But this time around, I really felt like adding it back into my diet was not easy. It didn't feel good. Like I really felt differently this time. I don't know why, maybe because I was thinking about it more and talking to you guys more and trying to get my act together a little more. But I really felt like when I put that sugar, of course I ate ice cream at midnight on the night, on Easter morning, right? But I didn't feel too good after that. And then over the next few days, as I added it back, and I still haven't added most of it back. I mean, I've been eating ice cream maybe a little bit, but probably my consumption is probably maybe 20% of what I was consuming before I gave it up, and even now I feel different. Like I feel like I should give it up. I haven't had a soda yet. I haven't put any sugar in my tea. I haven't, and even my ice cream consumption hasn't been every day like it was. So I do feel a difference in my body. So I know the sugar is doing something to me that shouldn't be happening, right? And I hate that because I want to eat the ice cream.
I love that you mentioned that because I think you brought up a really important point, and that's listening to your body, right? The talk here is love your bones, and I think it's like, yes, we want to love our bones, and we want to make sure that we're doing healthy things that make us feel good. And when we're eating things and it seems like it makes you feel good because you're happy because you had it, but then you actually physically don't feel good, listen to that. Right. That's kind of like your little gauge.
That little guy on your shoulder, that little guy on your shoulder saying, no.
Saying, no, don't do that. Maybe have a glass of alkaline water, so it's just about bringing that balance. And so and I think one of the points that you brought up too was that you avoided the sugar for a period of time and then you tried to reintroduce it back. So you really got to see what is it really doing to me, right?
Right. Because how do I really feel? Yeah.
So I think that's good feedback. That's what I wanted to say. It's good feedback sometimes when we avoid it and then we bring it back, and you can really have a clearer picture on how it actually is making you feel. And then when you get that feedback, I oftentimes think it's easier to just kind of just say, no, I don't think I want to keep that in my diet anymore.
I'm like, like I was, ginger ale and root beer and cherry Coke were my jams. I haven't had any soda, and I'm almost afraid to drink it because I don't want to drink it anymore. You know what I mean? But we're getting some questions in the comments, so I kind of want to address you guys. So thank you guys who are watching for responding to us here. So one of them is, how much vitamin D and zinc should we take? And Harper's right here with me. I don't know Harper. Yeah, you see with the background, you can't really see her. Say hi. Get in the frame, Harper. Say hi.
Well, for the vitamin D, I think Dr. Greg mentioned the first step. You want to make sure you get tested. If you have a doctor,
go to the doctor first is our first thing. Go to the doctor, get your numbers, figure out where you are. Right.
Yeah. I would say get your numbers, figure out where you are. Some people can be highly deficient, and some people might be mildly deficient, and some people just need like a more sustainable dose, right? So a sustainable dose that's usually pretty safe with people is about 2,000 IUs of vitamin D3 a day. But again, that absorption piece that Dr. Greg mentioned, so you want to make sure that you are taking it with a meal that has fat in it. So like, let's say, you're on the go.
What does that look like? What is fat?
Right. So let's say you're on the go and you're going to grab an apple.
Like, what's a meal that has in it?
Right. So like I was going to say, like an apple, like if you grab a piece of fruit, that doesn't, right? So you want something, let's say it's oatmeal and you had a little bit of milk in it or butter in it or something, that would be okay to do with, but just something where it's a little bit heartier. Usually dinner meals usually have a level of fat in them. So I think that's a good time to take it. You just don't want it to be like, oh, I just had a little salad. I mean, if you have salad dressing on it and it's olive oil with vinegar, vinaigrette, that's a good option. But you just want something with some kind of fat in it, probably chicken wing. They got too much fat, but that's another issue.
What about like avocado? Is avocado good?
That's what I was going to say, avocado. But you could also supplement with like omega-3 fatty acids, the gel caps. So taking those in combination, or the option that I mentioned that you can buy certain products that combine D3 and K2 with the phospholipid. There's a company called Quicksilver Scientific that I like to use that particular product because it's a liquid, it's a pump, a couple of squirts that gives you your 2,000 for the day, and it's highly absorbent.
That's good. Yeah, that's a good brand.
Yeah.
Okay. So we want to take it with fat. So we really but we sort of need to figure out where we are, and then we can say, oh, how much you take, right?
Yeah.
For all these things. So it means a conversation with your doctor and just understanding your blood work and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So
Ricky, you mentioned something earlier, and I wanted to kind of put a footnote on that, and that was about the sugar. Okay, why do we feel good after we have the sweets?
We get high.
Yeah, but the high is actually the body produces the feel-good hormone, dopamine, in response to the pleasure of the taste itself. Now, when you're dealing with environmental stress, whether it's the low income, whether it's the struggling for this or that, a lot of people are eating the way they eat because they're self-medicated, because life is not manageable without having that extra little surge of dopamine. So it's a coping mechanism. So a lot of the things that we see are also psychological based on the environment, but then the physiological link is that it alters the hormone level. And we could actually take this into hormone imbalance and the whole mental illness thing. All of it kind of feeds in together. And then the last piece that I don't think we have mentioned is by eating the way that we described, you're actually providing your microbiome with the types of materials that promote healthy bacteria, which is the fundamental basis of immune response in the first place. So like, for instance, onions is a prebiotic food that nourishes healthy bacteria, but all of the sugars and extra carbs and things are nourishing the unhealthy bacteria. So there's a whole nother world there inside of our gut that will determine how our system responds to various challenges. And so eating a healthy way actually promotes overall health, beginning with the core, which is in our gut.
I am so glad you mentioned that.
Those are some really big words, though. So help break it down for me, because I need some help.
Yeah, I'll break it down. So that's my research interest, is the microbiome. So you've probably seen commercials for Activia or probiotics or eat yogurt. Right. So our body is made up of more bacterial cells than human cells. Did you know that? Like, we have trillions of these bacterial cells in our body. But we don't eat. No. It's good. It's a great system. The problem is the system has to be balanced to operate the way it's supposed to. So if it's imbalanced and you're eating the foods we started out talking about, like the plant-based stuff and the vegetables and the green leafies, you're feeding the microbiome in your body good stuff. They can thrive. They can support your immune system. They will make you healthy. If you choose things on the other end, you say, well, I'm going to have fries, a cheeseburger, wing. I'm going to do this other stuff, right? So not only will you create that disbalance we talked about the acid and the alkalinity or the basic foods, but the other thing is we can actually create more of a digestive problem for ourselves by basically feeding the bad bacteria in our gut. And then we get something called like a dysbiosis. That means we have more bad bacteria than good ones. And we have things like a whole bunch of GI types of digestive disorders because of that. So it's great, I think, when people can put some type of probiotic in their diet, or they can take foods that have like fermented foods. They're not really typical in the American diet, like the miso soup and sauerkraut and kimchi. Like, we don't typically eat those kinds of foods. So that is the best way to get those fermented foods in our body. So if we don't do that, then I have people just take a probiotic, because that at least is giving you some benefit, could be some benefit in terms of that balance and keeping that balance with the microbiome. So it's actually a very, very hot topic. And I think science is still really delving deeper and deeper into this, because there's a lot of crosstalk between the bacteria. But I think, to just break it down, the best way to understand it is we want to make sure that we are feeding the microbiome good things and not bad things.
We have a lot of questions here. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No. Well, I was just going to say that just bullet points for microbiome. They've done studies to show that the microbiome of elite athletes is different from the general population. So in terms of muscle mass, endurance, and all of those things, there's a link between the population of certain types of bacteria. I mentioned immune response, but they've also shown like vitamin D absorption is very closely related to the microbiome itself. And there are some companies that have products where they have particular strands of bacteria, and the claim there is that it improves that. The other thing is mental health and the microbiome. You can't get away from the microbiome, because ultimately, once everything is broken down, it's going to either feed one type of bacteria or the other. And so we have to try to get a domination of the good bacteria, and it definitely promotes longevity.
Wow. All right, you guys, we have about 6 questions in about 8 minutes. So I'm going to just read them all to you, and you guys can figure out what to tackle. And you guys, we'll try to answer your questions online if we don't get to them today. So thank you for asking. So is eggshell calcium better or safer than what's on the shelf? If we're not, if we're really active, shouldn't we eat sugar? And what about intermittent fasting? Is that a good thing? DHA versus, I don't even know what that is, versus fish oil. So our audience is way smarter than me. Can somebody please address calcium supplementation? Let's see, kimchi, and what about kombucha?
Yes,
Kombucha?
that's another source. Yeah.
So there's a lot of things. So you guys tell me
Okay.
to answer what you can answer, and then we'll try to
Okay,
respond.
give me 1 minute and I'll try to answer about 3 of them. So DHA and the other fish oil. So DHA is one of the forms, which is dexahexanoic acid. So that one really has a good affinity for the brain function, especially like if a mother is pregnant and she's, taking DHA, I think is really good. So usually when you're looking for a fish oil, I think a combination of something called EPA and DHA. I usually like things that are more heavy DHA because of the increased amount that will help with brain function. I think another question about the calcium supplement, I think calcium is also important. Calcium, magnesium also important for the bone, supporting bones. But I oftentimes want people to be careful, especially when they're over like 35, 40 years old. I actually would prefer people take vitamin D3 and with the vitamin K, because I don't want to have too much I'm always worried about the arteries around the heart. So I don't want people just to be taking too much calcium because of that. So I think one source of a better form of that is really focusing on the green leafy vegetables and things like that, rather than taking an actual supplement. And then there was another question you said, but I'll let Dr. Greg go.
I can't even remember all the questions.
I know. How about intermittent fasting and kombucha? Can you talk about
kombucha is definitely supportive for microbiome as well. I think it's good. Just look at the sugar content in a lot of the drinks that are being sold. They're across the board. I've checked out different brands. I don't have a favorite, but I definitely think that gives you a little bit of that good bacteria, right? You see they have certain strains in there, so that's good. Yeah. And intermittent fasting, I totally am on board with that.
No. And the beauty of the intermittent fasting is it allows the normal body processes to occur with the circadian rhythm. Our systems were not made to consume heavy amounts of calories, an hour or so before we lay down. The fuel that we take in was to be coordinated with the level of activity that we would be engaging in. And so intermittent fasting allows the absorption to improve and also repair and maintenance, and even the secretion of certain enzymes occur principally during certain hours in the wee hours of the morning. And so when digestion is thrown in the middle of that by eating too late, it slows down the production of certain essential materials and also decreases the absorption as well. And so we can actually be operating in a nutrient deficit even while we are overeating. The other thing is it also inhibits the efficiency of the elimination of food. So we would tend to have longer transit times where we have the colon having too much fecal matter in, and that is very toxic material. And eventually, if it continues to stay on the walls of the colon, you can get inflammation in those areas. And there are some studies that suggest that this is where the nodules begin to occur. And so we want to have efficient waste removal. And I know people who are eating 3 or 4 meals a day, and they're having a bowel movement every 2 or 3 days. And I ask, what do you think the net accumulation is? And that's a big, big problem.
I love that Dr. Greg brought that up, because our systems were made and designed to rest and digest. So now this term of intermittent fasting, I've been doing that for years. It was before term even existed, but intermittent fasting. And sometimes I'll have patients say, I've got all these problems. And I said, well, what you need to do is just stop. You just stop. Don't even eat nothing over this amount of time. They'll be like, I actually feel okay. You'll actually live. You'll be okay.
Yeah.
Your vegetables, and it'll make you more appreciative when you get back to those veggies.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Or you'll appreciate the vegetables more, right? Right.
Right.
I had people say, I don't want to eat oatmeal, but I eat oatmeal every day, so I don't like oatmeal either. But
there are keto alternatives to just the carbohydrate-based cereal, and they may have like shredded almonds, different types of seeds. They mix them with certain types of nutrients. And I just bought a ton of it from Costco. And most of the time they'll say keto and they'll say net carbs 0. So there are options out there that you can also try.
That taste good. That tastes good. That
actually tastes good. Yeah. I like them with almond milk though.
Okay. Almond milk. Well, that's the thing, I think we're also hung up on taste. of how it tasted when our grandmother cooked it, or how it tasted when we grew up, and how we learned to cook, right? And I think that you can make stuff taste good and be healthy. You just have to figure out how to do it differently, right? And use spices and whatever to get those tastes that you're sort of used to, and maybe find new tastes. Like, you know, my kids eat Thai food all the time now. I would never grow up on that stuff. And it took me a minute to get into it, but, you know, explore some new foods, explore some new ways of cooking your collards. And, you know, you don't have to cook it with the fat back. And just think about this stuff, you know? So, oh my gosh, you guys, we could keep talking forever. So you got to come back and talk more. And, you know, but it's just thinking about life differently. It's just thinking about things differently. And also, I think for me, even when I give up sugar, I have to think about, well, it's between me and God, because it's during Lent. It's a God thing, you know, that keeps me not worried about it. But think about, you know, why you're doing this. You know, we only have one body to live in. And maybe, you know, since I had cancer, I'm a little more skeptical about what I'm eating, but, you know, we're doing so many things to ourselves that we don't need to be doing. And it's not that hard to figure it out. And here are these brainy, thank you. I love you guys so much.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing, Ricky. I love that you talked about what you put in the body, because it's just like if you're getting gas, right? You know, depending on what kind of car you have. Well, I think of all of our bodies, we are in luxury premium cars, and that's the type of gas we need to be doing, right? We need to be putting in those foods that are nutrient dense, which means when I pick it up, I should be getting a whole bunch of nutrients from it, right? Not just one thing. So you want to get, you know, the most bang for your buck when you select foods. And like Dr. Greg mentioned, like the keto cereals, things that have nuts and seeds. I mean, you're getting a little bit of all of the things that we mentioned. And I think you're right. It is a shift. It's a mental shift with, you know, changing how we eat and how we interact with food, our relationship, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So any closing words, Dr. Greg? Those are great closing words, Dr. Aisha.
There was a book that I read one time that dealt with mental health, but I just love the title more than I like the content. And that is The Body Keeps the Score. The body keeps the score. What you do to the body, it will run up a tab that will either be a deficit or it will be surplus. And if you find yourself in a crisis and you're in a nutrient deficit, then your body will not serve you well. But if you have some reserves in place that are supporting basic functions, you have a much greater chance of survival.
Love that. The body keeps the score. So how can people reach you? Well, you guys, you can reach through me, Ricky@touchbbca.org. How can people reach you, Dr. Aisha?
Yeah, if you can go through you guys, that's fine.
Okay, well, yeah, come through me. I'll come through me, and I'll get to these brainiacs for you.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Love you guys so much. I thank you so much. You guys, you have no idea how we got here today to get these lovelies on the Zoom. So thank you. Breasty love.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And look, join us in a month, you guys. We're on the first Sunday of every month at 3 o'clock here on BlackDoctor.org. We thank Amgen, our sponsor, and we hope to bring you good information about how to love your bones. So thank you.
All right.
Be blessed. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.